All right, so we're diving into some research today, and this is about the link between depression and mortality.
Yeah.
And you sent me over some really fascinating articles
Oh, yeah.
about this, but this long-term study from China, this one really stood out to me.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
With over 13,000 people.
Wow.
It really delves into how depressive symptoms change or don't change over time. And the
Right.
big question is, were they still alive by the end of the study?
Yeah, it's a question I think a lot of people are curious about. And what I think is so interesting about this is that a lot of the studies that we see about this are just like a snapshot in time.
Right. Okay.
They're not long-term like this.
Yeah, and they use this really interesting method
Yeah,
called a group-based trajectory modeling, which is kind of a
it's a mouthful.
it's a mouthful, but
Yeah.
it's a really cool concept.
Yeah.
It's basically like watching a movie of someone's depression over time.
Exactly.
Like you see the whole story unfold
Totally.
instead of just a single snapshot.
Yeah, and by doing that, they found
Mm.
5 distinct patterns.
Yeah.
Almost like, characters in our mental health movie.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so picture this.
Okay.
We've got steady lows.
Mm-hmm.
These are folks whose depressive symptoms stayed really minimal throughout the study.
Yep.
And then we have steady moderates.
Yeah.
Similar stories, some symptoms,
Yeah.
but pretty consistent over the years.
Yeah, and then things get interesting.
Yeah.
We've got an upward climb group.
Okay.
So they're starting off with fewer symptoms, but we see this gradual increase over time.
Yeah, like a slow burn,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, exactly.
And then, of course, the opposite, the downward slope.
Yeah,
So starting rough, but things are improving as the study goes on.
exactly.
Okay, and last but not least, we've got the consistently high group,
Yep.
where you guessed it, those depressive symptoms kind of stuck around at a higher level
Yeah.
throughout the whole study.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've got our cast of characters now.
Yes. Let's see what happens in their movies.
Yes. So how did these different depression movies relate to their risk of dying?
We'll buckle up,
Okay.
because this is where I think it gets a little surprising
Okay.
for some folks. So let's start with that upward climb group.
Okay.
They actually had a 30% higher risk of dying during the study
Wow.
compared to those steady lows.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. Even though they didn't meet the criteria for clinical depression at the beginning,
Right.
that upward trend was still linked to a higher risk of mortality.
That's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's not just about hitting a certain level of depression. It's about
Okay.
like the direction things are headed in.
It's about the trajectory, exactly.
Yeah. So what's going on there? Why would worsening symptoms, even if they're not severe at first, be linked to a higher risk of dying?
Right. Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. There are a lot of things that researchers are looking into, but one thought is that even mild depressive symptoms, if they go untreated, can become this chronic stressor on the body.
Okay, so like being in fight or flight mode all the time?
Yeah, exactly. And when that happens, it can dysregulate the body's stress response system,
Right.
which we call the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis,
Okay.
or HPA axis
HPA axis.
for short.
God, okay.
It's kind of like, if your car's emergency brake is being pulled even just a little bit all the time,
Okay.
eventually things are going to wear down.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the HPA axis is like the system that controls our stress hormones, right?
Yes, exactly. It's like the command center for our stress response.
Okay.
And if it's stuck in overdrive, it can lead to a lot of different health problems.
Right.
Heart disease, inflammation, weakened immune system, the list goes on and on.
So even if those upward climbers didn't fit the classic picture of like severely depressed,
Yeah.
their bodies were still taking a hit from that kind of constant low-grade stress.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so what about the downward slope group then?
Okay.
They started out with higher symptoms,
Yeah.
but things got better over time.
Uh-huh.
What happened to them?
Well, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
They did not show a statistically significant increase in their risk of dying,
Really?
even compared to the steady lows.
So it seems like we always hear
Yeah.
that any history of depression puts you at higher risk,
Right.
but this is challenging that.
It's suggesting that maybe previous studies
Yeah.
that only looked at, depression at one point in time
Right.
might have overestimated the risk for those whose depression actually improved.
Okay.
It's a good reminder that mental health is not static.
Right.
It's a dynamic process. Things can change.
It's a process.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the upward climbers
Yeah.
facing greater risk,
Uh-huh.
and the downward slopers kind of defying our expectations a little bit. What about the consistently high group?
Yeah.
These are the folks that had, persistent elevated symptoms
Yeah.
throughout the study. So what did their movie look like in terms of mortality risk?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately,
Yeah.
their story is a bit more predictable. They had the highest risk of dying,
Okay.
a 59% increase compared to the steady lows.
Yeah. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But it also makes sense, right?
It
If
does.
that chronic stress response we were talking about
Right.
is constantly activated, it's got to take a toll.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of research
Yeah.
that shows how that chronic stress plays out in real-world health outcomes.
Right.
Remember how we were talking about the HPA axis
Yeah.
and how it can cause problems when it gets stuck in the on position?
Mm-hmm.
Well, studies have linked that to
Yeah.
a whole host of issues: heart disease, diabetes, certain types of cancers, even problems with memory and concentration.
So the longer someone experiences those high levels of depression, the greater their risk for all of these problems.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like that emergency brake
Yeah.
we were talking about. Eventually, something's got to give.
Sadly. Yeah,
Yeah, it paints a pretty sobering picture,
it does.
but it also underscores how important
Yes.
early intervention and treatment is.
Yeah, I think that's a huge takeaway here.
Yeah,
We can't just wait for things to get better on their own.
right.
We need to be proactive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground here,
Yeah, we have.
but this is just the beginning of our deep dive. Are you ready to keep going?
Oh, I am definitely. Let's keep exploring this.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. There's still a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
And I think you'll find this next part really interesting
Okay.
because it gets into how lifestyle choices
Okay.
play into all of this.
Okay, so we've got our depression movies.
Right.
We've got these different trajectories.
Yep.
We're seeing how they impact mortality risk.
Uh-huh.
But it's not the whole story, is it?
It's not the whole story. There's more going on.
Yeah. What else is happening behind the scenes?
Right. Well, the study also looked at, the people in each of these groups,
Right.
and they started to notice some patterns.
Okay.
For example, those in the steady low group,
Yeah.
they tended to be younger,
Okay.
living in more urban areas, more educated, and they had a lower BMI.
Okay.
They were also less likely to have things like hypertension or diabetes or a history of smoking.
So basically healthier lifestyles all around.
Yeah.
Seemed like it. Yeah. Which makes you wonder if that contributed to their lower, more stable levels of depression in the first place.
It's the chicken and the egg thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, does a healthier lifestyle lead to better mental health, or do people with fewer depressive symptoms
Right.
find it easier to maintain healthy habits?
It's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both.
Okay, so that's the steady lows. What about the folks at the other end of the spectrum?
Yeah.
The consistently high group.
Yeah.
Were there any sort of common threads in their lives apart from, the depression itself?
Unfortunately, yes,
Yeah.
there were some. And, they tended to be older. They lived in more rural areas.
Yeah.
They had lower education levels.
Okay.
And they had higher rates of those chronic conditions we talked about,
Yeah.
like hypertension and diabetes.
So it's like this double whammy.
It is.
They're dealing with the chronic depression.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, more likely to be struggling with these
Right.
physical health problems too.
It really highlights just how interconnected these issues are.
Yeah.
You can't just treat mental health
Right.
in a vacuum.
It's all connected.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this tangled web,
Yeah.
mental health, physical health, lifestyle choices,
Right.
social factor. It's all intertwined.
And speaking of social factors, this was a study done in China.
That's right.
So, different culture, different society.
Yes,
All of that comes into play.
definitely. And, things like access to health care,
Mhm.
social support systems, even just the stigma around mental health.
Right.
All of that can influence, how depression shows up, how
Yeah.
people seek help.
So while the findings are really valuable,
Yes.
we have to, keep that context in mind.
Right. We can't just assume
Yeah.
that it'll be the same everywhere.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So the big takeaway is that understanding the dynamic nature of depression,
Yeah.
that's crucial.
That's the key takeaway.
And that applies everywhere.
Right.
It's a call to action for all of us.
And everyone. Yeah. Researchers, clinicians, policymakers,
Yeah.
and, frankly, just all of us as individuals.
So what would that look like practically speaking?
Yeah.
What needs to change if we're moving away from this static view of depression?
Right. Well, I think for starters, we need to move beyond these one-size-fits-all solutions
Okay.
and embrace a more personalized approach
Okay.
to mental health. just like doctors tailor treatment plans for physical illnesses
Right.
based on individual needs.
Yeah.
We need to do the same
Right.
for mental health.
I like that. So instead of just asking,
Yeah.
do you have depression?
Right.
It's more like, where are you on your mental health journey?
Exactly.
What are your, unique challenges?
Yeah. What are your strengths? What are your resources?
Yeah.
How can we support you
Yeah.
on your journey?
Yeah. Recognizing that people's needs change
Absolutely.
over time.
Yes.
And what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. And I think it's also about empowering people to take an active role
Yeah.
in their own well-being,
Totally.
giving them the tools they need
Yeah.
to not just cope,
Right.
but to thrive.
I love that word thrive.
Yeah.
It's not just about,
It's not just about surviving.
yeah.
It's about thriving.
Yeah. Living a fulfilling life.
Yes.
Even with the challenges.
Exactly. And I think this study gave us some clues about how those interventions, those tools,
Yeah.
can really make a difference.
Yeah. So it's not just about fixing the depression itself.
Like it's about giving people the support they need,
The resource.
the resources to manage those chronic stressors,
Yeah.
improve their overall health,
Yeah.
and ultimately increase their chances of living longer, healthier lives.
Exactly. All right, so we talked about the impact of lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
We talked about the need for
gotcha.
better access to care.
Yes,
But this study also dug a little deeper, right?
you did. It did.
It looked at how certain specific factors
Yeah.
might influence the relationship between those depression trajectories and the risk of dying.
Ah, yes. You're talking about the subgroup analysis.
Yes.
Remember how we were talking about those common threads
Yes.
among the different groups, things like age, education level, chronic health conditions?
Yeah.
Well, the researchers wanted to see if that link between depression and mortality still held true, even when you factored those things in.
So they were trying to isolate the effect of the depression itself.
Exactly like if someone was younger and healthier.
Right.
Did that upward trend in symptoms still matter as much?
Right. And it did it.
And for the most part, they found that yes, it did.
Okay.
Those with increasing or consistently high depressive symptoms still face a greater risk of dying regardless of age,
Oh, okay.
gender, BMI, or whether they had things like hypertension or diabetes.
So even if you're relatively young and healthy,
Yes.
that trajectory of your depression,
Right.
whether it's getting worse or staying high, still has a significant impact
Yeah.
on your overall risk.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a powerful message, especially for, younger folks
Right.
who might think, oh, I'm young, I'll bounce back.
Yeah.
But this is suggesting
Yeah.
that we can't afford to ignore these warning signs,
Right.
no matter what age we are.
No matter what age. Okay, so did they find anything else?
They did. There were a couple of interesting wrinkles in the data.
Ooh, I love wrinkles. Tell me more.
Well, two things kind of stood out.
Okay.
First, when they looked at alcohol consumption.
Okay.
The link between that upward climb trajectory and mortality risk was only statistically significant among those who didn't drink alcohol.
Interesting. So are you saying that like moderate drinking might actually be protective in some way?
That's one possible interpretation.
Okay.
But I think we have to be really cautious about jumping to conclusions
Right.
based on a single study.
Right. Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. Correlation
Okay.
does not equal causation.
Okay, what about the other wrinkle?
Well, that one had to do with smoking.
Okay.
They found that the increased mortality risk
Okay.
associated with the consistently high trajectory
Okay.
was even more pronounced among current smokers
Okay.
compared to those who never smoked or had quit.
So basically smoking is amplifying the negative effects
It seems that way.
of the depression.
Yeah. It's not exactly shocking,
Right.
but it's still a stark reminder
Yeah.
of how intertwined these lifestyle choices
All
are
right.
with our well-being.
Yeah. And it really reinforces that whole person approach
It does.
that we were talking about earlier. You can't just treat depression in isolation.
Right. You need to look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
Everything that's going on in someone's life,
Yeah.
their behaviors,
Their environment, their support system.
exactly, access to resources.
It's about empowering people
Yes.
to take control of their health.
On all levels.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a journey, not a destination.
It is a journey.
And sometimes the most important step is just acknowledging where you are
Yes.
on that path.
And deciding where you want to go.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how much we've uncovered
I know.
from just one study.
Yeah.
But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface.
There's so much more
Yeah,
to learn about this.
definitely.
This your complex dance between depression and mortality. Are you ready to keep exploring?
Oh, I am absolutely. Let's keep going.
Okay, so we're back. And we've been talking about some pretty heavy stuff
Yeah, we have.
about depression and mortality. But you know what? For me,
Yeah.
Learning all this is actually strangely hopeful
I agree.
because it shows us that there's so much we can do
Mm.
to influence those trajectories, those mental health movies.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to get, kind of lost in the statistics and the doom and gloom.
Right.
But at the end of the day, this knowledge really does empower us.
Yeah.
It gives us a roadmap for better prevention, better treatment, better support, not just for ourselves,
Yeah.
but for everyone around us.
So let's talk about that roadmap then.
Yeah.
We've hinted at some of the directions, but let's get specific.
Okay.
So if we're moving away from this static view of depression,
Right.
this idea that it's either there or it's not,
Yeah.
what does that mean for how we approach mental health?
Well, imagine a world where mental health checkups are as routine as going to the dentist.
Okay.
We wouldn't wait until someone has a mouthful of cavities
Right.
to start talking about dental hygiene, right?
Right. So instead of waiting for that full-blown crisis,
Exactly.
you're saying we normalize checking in with ourselves
Yes.
and each other.
With each other. Yeah. Make it part of the
Well, yeah.
everyday conversation.
Make it part of the conversation. Absolutely.
And just like those checkups at the dentist, these mental health check-ins wouldn't be about slapping a label on someone.
Right.
It would be about understanding where are they on their journey?
Yeah.
What are their needs?
What are their needs?
What kind of support would be helpful?
Yeah, so it's about early intervention, catching those upward trends
Exactly.
before they get too steep,
Before they get too steep, yeah.
and helping people build those, healthy habits,
Yes.
those coping mechanisms
The coping mechanisms?
that can keep their mental health movie on a positive track.
That's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that early intervention piece
Yes.
is crucial because we know the sooner we address these challenges,
Mhm.
the better the outcomes tend to be.
Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah, but it also means, tackling that stigma head on
Oh, absolutely, because you're right.
because there's still so much shame and silence
There is.
around mental health.
It's one of the biggest hurdles.
Yeah, people are afraid to speak up, afraid to seek help,
Yeah. And they're afraid of being judged.
afraid of being judged. Yeah.
Exactly.
We're told to just tough it out.
Yeah, just toughen up.
When it comes to mental health, which we would never do for a physical illness.
We would never say that about a broken leg.
Right, exactly.
But for some reason, it's okay to say that about, mental health challenges.
Yeah. And that silence can be deadly.
It can be. It keeps people isolated, suffering in the shadows,
Yeah.
prevents them from getting the help they need.
So how do we break that silence? How do we change the narrative?
Well, I think for starters, we need to talk about mental health more openly.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
honestly, we
Yeah.
need to share our own stories, challenge those stereotypes, and create a culture where it's okay to not be okay.
It's okay to not be okay. It's like that old saying,
It is.
a problem shared is a problem halved.
Right.
When we open up,
So
connect with each other,
connect with each other, yeah.
those burdens start to feel lighter.
And we need to make it easier
Yes.
for people to access mental health care.
Yeah.
We need to invest in more affordable services.
Yeah.
Train more mental health professionals. Make sure those services are, culturally sensitive.
Yes.
Tailored to the unique needs of diverse communities.
Because right now,
Yeah.
for so many people,
It's a nightmare.
it's a logistical nightmare.
It's a logistical nightmare.
It's too expensive. The wait lists are too long. They don't know where to turn.
And it can be so discouraging
Yeah.
for people who are already struggling.
It's like we're asking people to climb Mount Everest
Yeah.
in flip-flops.
In flip-flops,
I
exactly.
would give them.
We need to give them the right gear,
Yeah.
the right support to make that climb manageable.
And it's not just about professional help, is it?
No, it's not.
We talked earlier about
Right.
the power of social connection.
Yeah, social connection is huge.
What can we all do on like a personal level to create,
Yeah.
the supportive communities?
We'll start by being a good listener.
Okay.
Check in with your friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
Really listen to what they're saying
Yeah.
and let them know you're there for them without judgment.
And it's not always about having all the answers, right?
No, it's not.
Sometimes it's just being present,
It's about being present,
validating their feelings.
validating their feelings, yes.
And don't underestimate the power of those simple acts of kindness.
The small things.
Yeah.
The small things really do matter. A phone call, a text message, a handwritten note.
Yeah.
Those can make a world of difference to someone who's struggling.
And if you're the one struggling,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Please don't be afraid to reach out.
Whether it's, a friend, a family member,
Yeah.
a therapist, a support group.
Anyone.
You don't have to go through this alone.
You don't have to go through it alone. There are people who care,
There are people who care.
people who want to help, and there are resources available.
And remember, asking for help
Yes.
is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength.
It shows that you're committed to taking care of yourself
Exactly.
and writing a better mental health movie for yourself.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive
Yeah.
into depression and mortality,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this thought. Your mental health journey is just that.
It's yours.
It's yours.
It's your journey.
It's unique, it's complex,
Uh,
and it will have its ups and downs.
it will have its ups and downs, for sure.
But with awareness, with support, and with a commitment to self-care,
Yes.
you can navigate those twists and turns
Absolutely.
and write a story
Yes.
filled with resilience, hope, and ultimately
Yeah.
a life well lived.
A life well lived. I love that.
Thank you so much for joining us
Thank you for having me.
on this deep dive. Keep asking questions,
Yes.
keep learning, and most importantly,
Yes.
keep taking care of yourselves and each other.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay curious.